This video is about conflation, subtitled How Mary Magdalene Became a Prostitute. Now, Mary Magdalene was never a prostitute. What happened in the scriptures very clearly tells that she had seven demons removed, but she was always one of the ones at the cross who had paid for Jesus' life. So, how that woman of power and authority and wealth got to be a prostitute is conflation. About 600, a pope delivered a sermon that conflated Mary Magdalene with Mary of Bethany with a prostitute. See, what was happening at the time is that they were trying to conflate all the four scriptures and the gospels that we have and put them all together to tell one basic story. Now, one of the places you still see this today is in the nativity plays that we have kids do every year. Matthew tells the story of the Magi. Luke tells the story of the shepherds and everybody else coming. But we put the two together when we tell it in church. So that is an experience of conflation. With Mary Magdalene, what happened is that the Pope took Mary Magdalene, the character, thought that she was the same as Mary of Bethany, who knelt down and washed Jesus' feet with her rich hair, rich perfume and hair. And they conflated both of those women with an unnamed prostitute who came in and washed Jesus' feet with her tears. So the Pope put them all together into one being, and that's how Mary Magdalene becomes associated with a prostitute. But we've got three different women going on there. Another conflation that happens often is Lazarus. So we have two stories of Lazarus in the Gospels. We have one where he is where Lazarus is dead. His sisters Mary and Martha are mourning him. Jesus is upset and comes back and raises Lazarus from the dead. The other Lazarus we encounter in the scriptures is a poor man who dies and goes to heaven, and the rich man who'd been ignoring him the entire time goes someplace else and looks up to heaven and says, "Can you ask Lazarus to go tell my siblings so that they will not have the same experience that I have?" Often you will see people treating these as they were the same person. They're not. Lazarus in the first story was wealthy enough to have a family tomb. Lazarus in the second story was so poor he was begging outside on the gate. Two very, very different people. Another form of conflation we have is in the writers. There was, except for Paul and potentially John Patmos, there was no identifiable author of most of what is in the Christian scriptures. All of the Gospels are anonymous. We know that the person who wrote Luke also wrote Acts, but we don't know who that person was. So they were assigned the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but it's not that they were writing in those names and that they were known. John is a name that pops up numerous times throughout the New Testament because there are letters of John, there's the Gospel of John, and then there's also Revelation, which is written by John of Patmos. Conflation makes them all the Apostle John, even though the letters are written over a 60, 70-year period and have very different literary styles. A lot of people assume they're all the same person, and there's no evidence of that. The Gospel of Matthew, again, written anonymously, but people assume they conflate that with the Apostle Matthew. They were written at very, very different times. The Apostle Matthew that the story tells us about was probably long dead by the time the school of Matthew actually wrote the Gospel. So we have to be really careful when we're looking at characters and not assume they are the same place. Usually there's clues in there, like Priscilla. Priscilla was a nickname. Prisca was her name, and she was married to Aquila. Every time we see her, either in Paul's letters or in Acts, the two are put together. So we can be pretty assured that this is the same people in each of these connections. So that's not conflation, that's multiple references. So that does go on. And we have almost the same number or the same names of the disciples in all four Gospels. So these are the same characters. Peter is Peter is Peter. But not Peter who authored the letters. Because again, they happened much later. He probably was not alive at that point in time. So you have to be really, really careful. The problem with conflation is, if taken to its logical conclusion, means that you only have like 10 people who actually contributed to the Christian Gospels. And that's illogical. Over 100-year period, and we know a lot more people contributed to that. But the biggest issue goes back to my opening with Mary Magdalene. We have a credible powerhouse in the first century church who has been reduced to a sideshow gag, really, in modernity, because we, for some reason, really hold on to the fact that this prostitute identity, even though biblical scholars for at least 4 decades have been saying, no, there's no connection. This is conflation. It's not the way you're supposed to look at the person of Mary. Media hasn't helped, of course. They all want to present her as a young prostitute who was lost. And we have to really be careful walking that walk as well, because a lot of pastoral work is done with prostitutes and sex trade workers in the name of Mary Magdalene. So we don't want to take completely away that identity, because it's pastoral outreach to women who are already on the margins. But if you are not in that situation, or not know anyone else who's in that situation, you can separate them out. Mary of Bethany had a role. Mary of Magdala had a role. The prostitute in the story had a role. We cannot ignore these 3 women by pretending they were just one person.